Hello and welcome to This Week at the Movies. I'm Matt.
And I'm Eric.
And you know what? Bustin' makes us feel good.
Yeah.
That is why we are here with you on a Saturday night. That is just one of the reasons we're here on Saturday night. The other is because Eric was gracious enough to move a day ahead since I will be out of town tomorrow. But we didn't want to miss a chance to talk about Ghostbusters. We're going to talk about the entire history going back now exactly 50 years. 80s, let's see, 94, 2000, 40 years exactly.
Okay.
Thank God.
I figured the 50th anniversary of that was going to be like a big event. Like
Matt, I can't do math. Going back exactly 40 years. A bunch of people that were born in the 80s just had a self-reflective attack moment. You know what? Speaking of that, I should have been able to do that math myself. But yeah, so things happen. Looking at 5 films, including the one that just released yesterday, and that is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. This is the 5th Ghostbusters film, but the 4th in a contiguous series. One of the ones that we will talk about is decidedly in a different cinematic universe anyway. But this one sees our prime family that got introduced in 2021, Egon Spengler's family, working as a family, living in New York City, working as the Ghostbusters, out of the old firehouse, being bankrolled by Winston Zeddemore, who is being assisted by Janine, Annie Potts, who's still in there, helping them manage the property. They go out, they bust a ghost, but of course they catch the wrath of the brand new mayor, Walter Peck. It's nice to see that Walter Peck, it took 40 years, but he failed up into the seat of New York City mayor. He's none too pleased, still with the Ghostbusters. He's had 40 years of beef, and so he tries to quash that beef by putting them out of business. Starts by sidelining young Phoebe, who is probably not only the brains behind the operation, but got things going. So that kind of leaves her a little bit out in the cold. We also learned that Winston has expanded the kind of Ghostbusters ethos, has new development facilities, working on expanding the brand. Good old Ray is still kicking around at the occult and working with Winston to expand the brand. We got podcast back, spending his summer in New York City. I'm glad they threw in the line that he lied to his parents to explain why they would just let him go live with like a 60-year-old man in the basement in New York City for the summer. Lucky is now an intern at Ghostbusters secondary HQ. So we get the whole band back together. We see some other fun faces. Patton Oswalt jumps in there. Camille Nanjian jumps in there. But the big news is a ghost that's also some kind of god breaks free from his trap and threatens to throw New York City into a new ice age. And let me tell you, this was the Day After Tomorrow sequel I never saw coming, as that frozen ice age starts to overtake New York City. But who are you going to call? The Ghostbusters. And I will tell you, I had a good time with this one. These films have always been a little self-referential. They have a little bit of nostalgia. We see everybody, Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, Annie Potts, and Ernie Hudson are very present in this. They arguably have a bigger role in this one than they did in the reboot in 2021. You also have the central family at the center of it, driving the ball forward in their relationship and their dynamics. Probably one of the better Finn Wolfhard, roles that he's had recently. It made me that much more excited for Stranger Things 5. And I also didn't know with how many people were dropping in here if like 11 was just going to appear and help the Ghostbusters in that last act, because it seemed like everybody and their brother was showing up. But I had a good time with this. I'm going to give it 1 thumb up. Eric, what did you think of this one?
I'm also going to give it 1 thumb up, but I think I could go further with it. There are recognizable problems that come with a lot of big films with this movie. but I kind of loved a lot of this. I guess this is a movie where genuinely my expectations were so like low that so many things caught me by surprise at how much care was put into it. I love the thought put into the roles that everybody has. I love the performances where everyone seems to be taking the situation seriously, and when it is funny, sort of letting it play for the comedy that's actually there. There was some genuine sequences of tension where they bought into their premise instead of trying to wink at it and try and like make things creepy. Dan Aykroyd is like someone who's kind of known outside as someone who's into the occult, so letting that character live on in that kind of thing I thought was great. Ernie Hudson being like a compassionate supporter who grew into that role, it makes so much sense and is not even a thing that we could have brought up in Afterlife or anything before. Like it works really, really well. There's just a lot of thought put into the roles these people would have in this world, and then everything felt kind of nice. And I think a huge standout for me was Emily Lind, who's from Dr. Sleep, and she was young in something else. She sticks out in The Babysitter. She's the girlfriend in The Babysitter, and just her as this ghost. I almost, a part of me knew she has to be tied into the big villain as soon as she shows up, because again, this movie is kind of familiar as a big blockbuster. But there was something so enjoyable about her relationship with McKenna Grace, and the two of them playing chess together and spending time together and talking about, like, what does it feel like, how do you miss people, do we become part of the universe, what happens, all of that. Even Paul Rudd, who I think had the cheesiest sort of through line in this movie, I thought he really owned that sort of like misfit father figure. Like I really, everyone, Camille Nanjiani as this fire master, I think that might be the other part of the movie that got a little overplayed in the cheese factor for me. But I just bought into every relationship, and every scene just like felt good. So there are weird things like this creature, the possessor, this like red light that keeps flinging from object to object, bringing everything to life, eventually just gets eaten by Slimer and disappears. So I don't entirely know what the point of that was. But I also think people are being a little too hard on this movie for the whole like member berry and nostalgia thing, because Slimer in this movie plays pretty much the same role he played in the first two, as someone who just has a cameo and shows up and eats stuff. And I think the only really egregious cameo that was just like, why did we do this just because it was in the first movie, would be the library ghost. But otherwise, I think, I don't know if people are just so, it's an embarrassment of riches of blockbusters that we have, that like, yes, this movie has its problems, but there is a lot of good here visually, in terms of special effects, like sound design, like little advancements in the lore of how things work, allowing just I really, really, really liked this one way more than I thought I was going to, because Afterlife I thought was an enjoyable watch, but I didn't think it was like anything particularly great. But this one, for some reason, has gotten me the most into wanting to care about the characters and what happens to them of like any entry I've seen. So that's one thumb up, but it's a pretty strong one.
Yeah, and I enjoyed the film, and I had a good time with it. I don't People have complained a little bit. I think you and I are a little bit flipped in our feeling about this and Afterlife, which we'll probably see when we get to rankings in a minute. And maybe that owes a little bit to my love of Jason Reitman and his style of directing and putting together movies. He had, to me, his first three films were, almost a Hall of Fame level run. He did Thank You for Smoking, followed by Juno, followed by Up in the Air. And I love all those movies. He co-wrote the screenplay here. This one's dedicated to his father, but it's his co-writer who is the director. And I thought some of the things didn't quite hit the same. I wonder if that's, a little piece of it. Honestly, there were a few things too, like how they strained to ingratiate Lucky and podcast that felt a little forced, and maybe I enjoyed the heck out of those characters when we saw them. It's understandable that they wouldn't have traveled with you because they still live in Oklahoma. I mean, dad was the police chief. The other kid's supposed to be like 14. It would have been understandable if they would have moved on from that. But I thought it was enjoyable. I really like Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson in these movies. I like Bill Murray, and I get why we need to, but his couple of times in here almost felt a little forced too.
Yep.
Like we know we need to have Bill Murray. When you did Afterlife, I wanted to see all those guys come out, and that was saying goodbye to Egon, but I would have been okay if we didn't have all of them for this one. But I thought the storyline between Phoebe and her ghost friend was a little fascinating, a little heartbreaking at times. Kind of came together a little bit at the end. I don't know that it totally lands, or that it totally gets where it needed to get, but it was fun enough. And I kept expecting there to be some kind of, you spend a lot of time with Carrie Coon and Paul Rudd's characters going back and forth, even from almost that first meeting with the mayor on, about what is our relationship to one another and stuff. You get a little bit of a throwaway with McKenna Grace and her comment to Paul Rudd at the very end, but would have liked to see some kind of resolution, because they go back and forth like, what are they to each other? And that question never entirely gets answered in a satisfying way. Well, it's almost a throwaway.
She told me, Dad.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's the thing. I think every plot thread in this has this like cheesy emotional beat that kind of sours right near the end. Like with the ghost friend, how it's like, oh, like, I'm sorry, like, and my family, and like just like the weird I got tied into being with the villain thing, like just
and at the beginning it seemed like, she needed companionship. When she first sets up the chessboard, it's obvious that she's seeing if she can connect with her grandfather again, because she seems excited when the pieces start moving, and that was how they first connected in Afterlife. And when she sees who it is, she's not surprised, but she's also not happy. I think that was the read that girl was getting.
But it was like, I was so good. Like, I could gush. For some reason, I want that scene as just a short film, because as soon as the pieces started moving, I'm like, this is supposed to be Egon. Like the hints were in the first movie. And it goes and it just introduces this new person and this new idea of their relationship with the afterlife. And like, they've never sat down and just chatted with one of these ghosts before. Like, I don't know.
And I could be off, but I wasn't sure what they were trying to say about what she wanted out of the relationship either, because it seemed like she needed a friend at first, but when she goes in the machine and pulls her spirit out, for a minute there, that felt like they were leading
to a romance.
To a romance.
I thought it was kind of ambiguous, and I'm kind of okay with that. I like that the idea is like, there's this untouchable person that I can't explore these feelings anyways, and I'm young, and I'm gonna like this running theme of them telling this girl that she has to go. I want the sequel to this to just be a coming of age, graduate high school, like almost a ghost hangout movie. Like I really liked all of that stuff in here.
Yeah, and there's plenty of potential, and there's plenty of stuff that works. I just didn't think it didn't hit for me the same way as the movie that directly preceded it, or as some of the better ones in this franchise, which kind of brings us. I'm going to do a quick recap of these franchises, and then I will let you give your 1 to 5 rankings. We started 1984 with the OGs. This was them beating Mr. Stay Puffed. They gave us a sequel in 1989, and then it was a very kind of quiet period. And during that time, Harold Ramis passed away, and it seemed like there was always rumors: are we going to get a Ghostbusters 3? Are we not going to get a Ghostbusters 3? And after that point, it seemed like, well, we're never probably going to go back to the original franchise. So in 2016, Paul Feige steps in, and we get kind of the female-fronted reboot of Ghostbusters. Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Annie Potts, Sigourney Weaver all make appearances in here. So it's not the same Ghostbusters universe. It's definitely supposed to be kind of a parallel universe. Felt like possibly the reboot of a franchise. I enjoyed it. Not everyone seemed to receive it that well. I kind of died on the vine. That to me also is one of the best Chris Hemsworth performances in his career. He is best when he's doing comedy. He does that. My wife says, though, he looks best when he's doing Avengers. So, yeah. And then in 2021, Jason Reitman gives us Afterlife, which, rebooted it. We weren't sure what the connections were going to be to the original, but then very much set in the same cinematic universe, which leads to its own sequel, Frozen Empire, which is now our 5th. So, Eric, I'll let you go first. Give me 5 to 1.
So, starting at the bottom is Ghostbusters 2. The first one that I saw, and the one that I think I've seen the most. And I think that might be a part of it, is what enjoyment I do have in it, I'm kind of burned out on. And you'd think there'd be nostalgia there, but it's just a lot of uncomfortable vibes with some enjoyable scenes, and the actors are all giving great performances, and I love like the look at them as just being like exterminators that are into this paranormal stuff, and it's unique and it's neat. And I don't have the disillusionment of people who grew up like with the original and then waited 5 years and then they're like, oh, I thought this was going to be something else, but it's just like more of this. All the things that I hear, they don't apply to me because I just saw this movie first. So it's like, I think there is something to it, but it's at the bottom. So right above that, you have the 2016 movie. I also kind of really enjoyed it. It kind of has this like Nickelodeon movie flavor, which is like, this is a weird time to bring up Nickelodeon. I feel bad for everything that's gone on with those people. But I didn't understand all of the discourse around like the why people thought it was so bad, and like how much it was with like the female led thing and like all these things. I do think that it misunderstands the original as just trying to be an outright comedy, and they just tried to make an outright comedy, and so it doesn't ever quite take things like seriously. So you can't laugh at it because it's laughing at itself sometimes. But I thought it was fun. I love a lot of the cameos and actors and things like that. Like I don't have any like ill will or anything. And yes, Chris Hemsworth is hilarious in that. So that brings me up to what would have to, I guess, be Ghostbusters Afterlife, which just didn't suck me in as much as this one, but is definitely like earthier, and Jason Reitman is fantastic, and I love all the characters, and like a repeat of the first movie or whatever. They pulled off something that should cause like a riot, which is to bring a person back from the dead in a way that felt surprisingly respectful and made me not fear for the future of people buying and selling the rights to actors that are dead and using them in movies. And like that world seems like in a post-apocalyptic nightmare to me, but they pulled it off. Like that's pretty incredible. And I really liked all of the new characters, and like just, yeah, things felt grounded compared to the 2016 one. So Frozen Empire, I think for right now, until I watch it and see what lingers. Like, I can't tell if I'm going to be more bored by the familiarity of the plot or if I'm going to be more invested because I get more out of watching and caring about these characters interacting with each other. But right now it's number 2. But number 1 is the original for me because it just has what that inexplicable kind of spark. You can tell that when you're watching this movie that it's a bunch of people came up with an idea for the first time and they're doing a lot of things, and then like just having to compose a lot of sequences and scenes that even structure this movie in a way that they're really not sure this is going to land or make sense to anyone, but they really like the concept and went for it. The sense of humor is sometimes somehow dry, even with everything being so over the top. And I think a lot of that is probably Bill Murray in that, but even just like the little moment of them not being sure if the backpack is nuclear in the elevator and just like standing away from it is just such a I don't know.
Those
It's
dry Harold Ramis performance lines.
yeah, like
Well, do you ever
yeah,
wonder how different it would have been? Originally, it was conceived as a starring vehicle for Aykroyd and John Belushi.
John Belushi. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and Harold Ramis was a frequent contributor, worked on National Lampoon and
Mhm.
all those. So, you know, I'm sure
And
they
I
were. I'm sure they weren't sure how it was going to
yeah,
land.
like it's wild. Watching that movie with the presence of mind that nobody had watched this movie. There's like this is the first of like a thing. It's just wild. There's something so interesting about it, and like the music is all original and all that kind of stuff. By now, we're playing the Ghostbusters theme at the end of the movie, and they're all standing in the street, and everyone's cheering for them in the 5th movie, and it's like, oh, okay, classic reference to things, but like to just like get a group of extras to stand on a blocked off city street and everyone cheer for these exterminator guys because we promise it'll make sense later. Like, I don't know. That's the cool thing about movie making to me is just like, how did you know? Who had the vision to just make that work? Like, I don't know. But yeah, it's a bunch of different ones have different highs and lows. This one is just the one that happens to come out on top. So
Yeah, and so I'll start mine. I'll preface by saying I don't think there's a bad movie in the franchise. I enjoy them all. You know, just rewatched actually the other 4 when I was getting ready for Frozen Empire in the last 6 weeks. Number 5 for me is the same as you, and that's Ghostbusters 2. And it's not because it's a bad movie. It just feels like they almost just tried to exactly remake Ghostbusters. You have the same, you know, you end in a certain spot. You had spent the entire original one with especially like Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver working, building up to being a couple. And, you know, it's like you're starting from square one and building all that over again in number 2, except for now she has a kid and she's being targeted by the museum. She's still the target no matter where she goes. You know, Ghostbusters have broken up between the time of the first movie and the second one, and now it's like, hey, you know, let's get this Ghostbuster thing together. Do you think this could possibly work? And you're like, literally, are these the choices you're making? You know, it's not a bad movie. It's just like it reminds me of one of my favorite movies of all time is Jaws, and my complaint about Jaws 2 is like they just did almost the same thing, and everybody's looking at Brody like there's no way a giant shark would ever be on Amity Island. I'm like, literally 3 years ago, bro, he just had to kill one. I mean, you're looking at him like he's dumb. My favorite, you know, meme about local elections is the guy that has the shirt that says the mayor from Jaws is still the mayor in Jaws 2, which, you know, if you're thinking about it, is just preposterous. So that to me is a little bit what the Ghostbusters to Ghostbusters 2 energy feels like. Maybe they never, when they made it, they probably weren't thinking about franchises. You know, nowadays everybody, it's like we got to make a franchise, but back then, so it kind of just hits like almost like an accidental plot. We're just remaking it, and like it's still entertaining. You know, Peter McNichol has some hilarious lines when they fall into the river of slime. That's kind of funny. Moving the Statue of Liberty. I mean, there's some fun things in there. It just doesn't doesn't hit as hard as some of the other ones. Number 4 for me is where I'm going to drop Frozen Empire. You know, I enjoyed it. I gave it 1 thumb up. I thought it was an enjoyable film. I just the ones that are above it I like a little bit better. Number 3 for me is Ghostbusters 2016, which they didn't try to take it seriously, and that's kind of what I love about it. It is the best pure comedy of any of the Ghostbusters movies. Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, and Kate McKinnon to me are kind of magic together. They have some incredible like line delivery and back and forth, and I loved Chris Hemsworth in that movie. There are just so many kind of funny things. It makes me laugh really hard. I've probably seen that almost 10 times since it was released. We watch it quite frequently. Hemsworth, I don't know what it is. 2 of his best performances for me are in franchise reboots. He did the Ghostbusters. He's also incredible in the reboot of Vacation. If you ever see that with Ed Helms, he has just the same kind of supporting role, just pops up and is magic and completely memeable. Number 2 for me is Ghostbusters 1984. I'm a child of the 80s, born in 81. I remember as a kid, I had my Ghostbusters action figures. I had Egon and Ray and Peter, and I had Slimer, and they had their proton packs. I watched the cartoon. I've always really loved that original Ghostbusters film. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was always a lot of fun, which is what made 2021 such a surprise for me. My number 1 is Afterlife. And it is the least comedic of any of the Ghostbusters films, but it is by far the most emotionally resonant. And that third act, man, the chills you get when you see the original guys step in the middle of that fight, and the way that they say goodbye to Egon, and the way he interacts with his daughter, Carrie Coon. And Carrie Coon is just such an incredible actress. You wouldn't really think of her in these kind of comedy franchises. She's such a gifted dramatic actress. And I thought Paul Rudd was funny in that one. There was some comedy, but what they did with the kids and some of the shots and the nostalgia and the kind of mystery and putting it together of all of it, just that was one of my favorite movies in 2021. It was in my top 10 that year that it came out, and so it is my number 1 for this franchise.
I'll give it one thing. It doesn't have William Atherton, who does a very good job to his detriment, because I hate that character so much. I want to scream.
I mean, that was William Atherton's bag in the 80s. He did it in
I know,
Hard.
Die Hard and all that. But it never gets quite as egregious. I think this might be the worst example yet, where I can understand how with the original Ghostbusters, he'd hear rumors and stories and see things, and he might not believe it for himself that like of what they're doing. But in 2024, where people are able to, he knows exactly what they're doing, to still be like, I understand that if I shut this thing down, it's going to cause a bunch of ghosts to get loose and wreak havoc on the city. I just personally hate you guys. Like it's so far, and he sells it
nothing
so
sums
well.
up politics in 2024 like a mayor taking that position, though. So
yeah. Oh gosh. Oh, I think that's why it's like too in there for me. It's like, come on. Oh,
well, that'll do it for our talk Ghostbusters. Hopefully you guys go out and enjoy it. There are quite a few fun movies out now. Before we get out of here, I want to give a little shout out. Both Eric and I are fans of a little actor named David Dastalmakian, and he has a starring role in the movie Late Night with the Devil. I was privileged to get to see a little screener of this. If you go to our YouTube channel, I have a quick review up for that. It's also available on the site. It opened in theaters on Friday. Very kind of clever, different take on a horror movie, almost done in real time on the set of a 1970s Tonight Show-esque talk show. some people have made some hay because they let AI create 2 still images that appear for a fraction of a second. Don't let that dissuade you. If you're a fan of horror films, if you're a fan of David Dastmalchian, go out there and give him a little bit of support and support the film. I'm sure it'll be streaming soon. It was produced by Shudder, so I'd expect it'll be on their streaming service after not too long. But just wanted to give a plug for that. I know you haven't gotten a chance to see it yet, but you are a big fan. So,
I'm so excited for that one.
Yeah. So
we got some fun stuff coming up real soon. We gotta get through Godzilla versus Kong, or Godzilla X Kong.
That's what I was gonna say. If you like franchise talk, we're moving from one franchise to another next week as we get Godzilla X Kong, which is the 5th installment in the MonsterVerse franchise, which now also includes a television series. We will talk about that movie and we will give our rankings for the franchise. That I'm sure will be yet another place where I'm the outlier with my one that's on top, unless Godzilla X Kong blows me.
No.
Away.
No, I think we should drop this information now, just in case someone sees that and anyone is interested in this, because yours and mine, both our favorite entry in the franchise, is the worst reviewed entry in the franchise. It's Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Yeah, and I don't understand why. So you know what? This week we got to see Finn Wolfhard. Next week we'll get to talk about a franchise that had Millie Bobby Brown. So yep. I wish she was in the new one. I'd be more excited. Although they didn't know what to do with her in Godzilla versus Kong. So
nobody knew what they were doing in Godzilla versus Kong. Anyways.
Somehow, Dan Stevens about to have himself a spring. He's in Godzilla X Kong, then he's in Abigail, which comes out at the beginning of April, and then he's in another surreal neon-produced horror film called Cuckoo, which I will let you go check out a trailer for that I saw before Immaculate today. And Dan Stevens is making his presence felt this spring. So. We will leave you with that. You have an entire week to catch up on the MonsterVerse. They're not all streaming on the same service, which would make some sense. Half of them are on Max. I think half of them are on Peacock at this point in time, which things happen.
And the show is on Apple.
Apple TV Plus. Yeah,
Monarch.
So. Well, that'll do it for this week. Hopefully Bustin' makes you feel good and you get out there. If those go
5 times.
Get out there 5 times. So you guys have a wonderful weekend. And until next time, we'll see you at the movies.